Fine. Thank you all for having me today. I'm so excited to be here. Such a wonderful conference and such inspiring speakers, and so I'm really privileged to work with Bojana, to hear all her work, and really impressive what you're doing in Serbia. So my story is a little different. I'm going to give you a story that's probably going to make you think a little differently. We've heard a lot about genetic testing and its importance. And yes, it's really important, and my story will show you why it's important. But also, it's a different take on things. So, let's see. Okay. Okay. It's not moving. Don't count my time, okay? Okay, so throughout history, we know that every single movement has been because there's been a patient voice. Whether it's reproductive rights in the 90s or access to HIV medication, there's always been a group of people that leads the way, right? And then in the American Disabilities Act, when people with disability didn't have the right to vote, they tied themselves to the White House, the stairs, and they said, we will not leave from here until we get the vote. And that's how the ADA was born. And in 1990, when the ADA came into being, I was born in 1978. So I grew up only knowing I had a disability. I never really knew what my rare disease was. This is going in a different way. Okay. Oh, okay, down is up. So, and disability rights movement, they gave us this saying, nothing about us without us. You cannot make decisions without including us. And this became a motto, not just for the disability rights movement, but also for rare diseases. This is our motto now. If you're making decisions, make it with us. If you're making decisions about us, then you're doing it wrong. So always make sure. And so I grew up in the Middle East, in Dubai. And at that time, it was not like Dubai you see now when you Google, right? It was just miles and miles of sand. When I was born, they said I had rickets. And then they said I had polio. And so I had misdiagnosis after misdiagnosis. My earliest memories was my father. He's an engineer. And he kept telling the doctors, her bones are bending, her bones are bending. And they would not believe him because, of course, the doctor is always right. So he believed what he was seeing, and he kept saying it. So my earliest memories was when my father would tie me to the ironing board to keep me straight. And he said, because her bones are bending, we've got to figure out a way to stop her from bending. And so I grew up not knowing, like, I had a rare disease. I knew only how to advocate for myself because my father, he said, you will get an education, you will go to school, and he would carry me 2 flights of stairs to go to my classroom because Dubai was not accessible. So that's how I grew up, really figuring out how to find the way. And so I come from Indian and Middle Eastern culture. And so if you live with a disability, you don't get married, you don't have family, and you definitely don't have children. So I was working with disability rights movements, and I was running a special needs school for people with disability because they were never included in society. And then I met my husband, and he said to me, you're going to give up on life and love and everything because of your disability? And of course, he's American, so he thinks in a different way. And so I thought to myself, really? Am I really going to do that? And so I decided to take the chance, and we did get married. And of course, they came, all the doctors and all the warnings, you will never have children. I was like, that's okay. Well, if you have children, they will die. Okay, we will see. Or if you have children, you may die. I was like, wow, that's interesting as well. And remember, in my family, I was a de novo mutation. Nobody in my family has any sign of history of this disease. So nobody knew anything about what I had, but they've all made the assumption that my child will die, or I will die, or something bad is going to happen. And perhaps they were right in some way, and perhaps they were wrong. And remember, this is a long time ago, before whole exome sequencing and all the wonderful things that we've described here today. So I took the chance and I got married. And of course, I thought we will never have children because the doctor said. And we decided we were going to adopt a child. And we had just started the paperwork, and I got pregnant. So, you know, doctors can be wrong. So I got pregnant, and then they said, oh my gosh, you must abort the baby. And so I said, why? Is there something wrong with the baby? No, no, no. Does he have all his fingers? Yes, everything looks fine. Okay, why will I abort the baby then? So we went on, and we said, every doctor's appointment was the same thing. Oh, abort the baby. Like, tell me what is the evidence. I was ready to do it if you give me the evidence of something's wrong. You still didn't know what I had, so how do you know what my baby has? So everything was fine. And in the Christmas of 2009, Arshan was born, and it's Persian for a good man. And he had no sign of disease. He was the healthiest baby born in the hospital that day. He was 9-pound baby. He was the largest baby born, and it was so funny because I gave birth in India, so everybody who came to the hospital said, go see the little lady with the big baby. So I had lots of people coming into my room to see the baby. And there was no sign at all. I was a very sick child. I spent my whole first year in the hospital. I never gained weight, never hit my milestones, nothing. But Arshan, he was running, he was jumping, he was playing, he was the tallest kid in his class. We had no idea what he had or that he had anything. So 2 years later, I was surprised with another Christmas gift. And in 2010, I had a beautiful boy. And we named him Jahan because it means blessing, miracle. And so we decided at that point, when he was born, we knew that Arshan started to regress. His feet started turning. And the first thing when we took him to the doctor, they said is, he's got high calcium in his blood. And I was shocked. I was like, I've never had calcium in my blood. Nobody has ever said that to me. And of course, I went back to dig my records, and there's nothing in my records. I can't find anything. And remember, when I was born in the 80s, they don't even give you the files. So I had one x-ray of myself, and it looked nothing like my son. So I started sending all his x-rays across the world to everybody I knew. Do you know this? Do you know this? Can you tell me what's wrong? And after that, I was so fed up. And somebody had asked that question, why they won't do the test. Because by then I had done so many tests, and I was mentally exhausted. I had seen over 30 doctors. I had sent my files all across the world, and I was exhausted. And I told my father, doesn't matter what they have. You raised me. I'm here today. I'm fine. I will take my children and go back to Dubai, and I will live my life. But God had other plans. My father said, no. And he said, no, we are going to see this one geneticist in South India. And my father is very stubborn. And he said, so you know where I get my stubbornness. He said, one doctor, last time. I said, Dad, finally, I will go see. And if I don't get anything, I'm done. I'm taking my babies and going back to Dubai. And we're done. We're not talking about this ever again. So he said, okay. So we drove 7 hours. And we sat in the waiting room for 5 hours. And I walked in, and she looked at my son, my second son, and x-ray, and she said, I know what you have. And I started crying because I believed her. It was something in the way she talked to me. And she said, and within 3 days, she had sent our blood to Germany from India, South India. And her professor, she had gone to a skeletal dysplasia class in Germany, and her professor had shown the class slides of skeletal diseases and told the class, we're going to skip this slide because you will never see a patient. She called her doctor and said, her professor, and said, I don't have one, I have 3 patients with this mutation. And so within 3 days, we had a diagnosis. This was the skeletal x-rays that she based the finding of. And when she saw these x-rays, it triggered, because this was the same slide and the same clinical features of the x-ray that her professor had shown. And that's my son too. And we were diagnosed with a very rare bone condition known as Jansen's metaphyseal chondrodysplasia. There are 400 different types of rare bone conditions, and we had hit the jackpot with this one. There were only 30 known cases worldwide since it was ever discovered, and I was the oldest living person with this disease. So there began my journey. It was autosomal dominant, caused by an activating mutation in the PTH1R receptor, and of course it causes short stature, hypercalcemia, and all sorts of other problems, which I never had because I was mosaic for my condition. So they never could treat me or find out what I had because I was such an anomaly to all the doctors. And so began our journey. We found one paper that didn't even mention Jansen's, but mentioned a skeletal dysplasia. And in that paper, it said, we can perhaps treat the overactive PTH receptor by creating an inverse agonist. I cut the paper, I underlined it. We packed our bags from Dubai and we moved to America to find the man who wrote the paper. He had been studying Jansen's for 20 years and he never met a patient. We were the first patients he ever met. And suddenly the question he asked me, why are you in a wheelchair? Because they had been focusing so much on the clinical lab findings that they never really knew how the disease impacted their life. And so he was so shocked. Then he met my children in the same year. And I told him, I read your paper. How can we make it a reality? How can we bring this treatment to the patients? And of course, there were only 3 patients at the time. And this is me at the NIH. We had just landed in the US. And this was my board I put together on the plane of all the pictures of this disease. And he was shocked by our determination. And he said, well, we need money to create this agonist. And that's when we decided to form the Jansen's Foundation in 2017. And then from there, we published the very first paper on Jansen's on my family, because I was the first patient with this condition to not have hypercalcemia and low PTH. I had normal PTH and normal hypercalcemia, but in the history of this disease, that's never been documented. So I was an anomaly, and so they wrote a paper saying that you can have Jansen's even if you don't have hypercalcemia. And this was a historical discovery for them. And then, of course, I went around making sure that people understood that Jansen's was a disease, even though it affected only 3 of us. We needed people to know about this condition. So we started a foundation. We started talking more about the disease. We were on Discovery Channel. And then we started talking about how we need a treatment for the world's rarest disease. And then very recently, we were in People magazine, which is in America a very big deal, like next to Taylor Swift, so you can imagine. And so because of getting the foundation and because we put the gene on all the skeletal panels, we started to find patients, and patients started to find us. But even today, there are only 11 patients in the world, and many of them are just children. But the good news is, because of the work that we did in characterizing the disease with the researchers at MGH, we were able to create a mice model using my gene to create mice models to test the antagonist that they created in their lab. And so for the first time in 2019, I wrote a grant with the MGH, and we won one of the largest NCATS grants. This is a grant they give in the US to fund translational science, to build a toxicology study, to develop the treatment for our community. And that's us at the NIH, for the first time, our natural history study, to begin to document this condition. And this is our first international patient we flew from Brazil, the only other adult living with this condition. And she was shocked that we found her. And we found her through all the social media work that we did to discover this condition and other patients. So our mission was really simple, to fund the antagonist. And these are the children who live with this disease today. She's from Paraguay, he's from Australia, the only child in Australia, the only child in Paraguay, and these three are from America, my two boys and another boy. And so for ultra-rare diseases, it's really hard. It's not about just diagnosing to say, let's abort. It's about diagnosing to find therapy. It's about finding a way to find treatments and to be able to talk in ways to patient families about hope. What is the hope? What is the next step that we can take together? It is not about dismissing our lives, because if my father or my mother had whole exome sequencing, I may not be here today to talk to you. And the work we've done in rare bone, we've changed the landscape of rare bone, because not only for Janssen's, I am now part of a rare skeletal international group where we are funding and moving treatments for rare diseases in all bone-related conditions. So small patient populations make it extremely difficult to get funding. It's very difficult to get into clinical trials or anything because we don't understand the disease. There's so much heterogeneity in it. So even by diagnosing in the womb, you may not diagnose correctly. So all the time, don't go only by those don't go only by the computer-fed data. You have to talk to the family. You have to understand the clinical manifestation of the disease, because it's not always the same. And so it may be different, may present differently. So you have to keep your mind wide open to that possibility. If it's not, especially when it's an ultra-rare disease. There's a high development cost for developing treatments for rare disease in general. But like I say, we talk about the zebra in the room. We say we are the unicorns among the zebras. So that's why it becomes even more challenging for us to be able to develop treatments for ultra-rare. But having that mindset will open up your mind to the possibilities of treating more common diseases as well, or rare diseases. And so access to treatments and awareness and education, we talked a lot about this. So like I say, when I started my journey, I had no idea I would be here. And now it's close to 10 years, and we will be in first time. I will be a patient next year for our first clinical trial for a therapy, the first ever therapy for Janssen's disease, because of my children and because I got the diagnosis, and it started me on this journey. And that's why, we always say, I love this quote, because you should never doubt that a small group of committed individuals can make a change, because it is possible. So when you go out and you are working with patients, remember that they are carrying with them the hopes and their dreams into your room. And if you don't have the right language to comfort them, then you are, in many ways, you are shattering their dream. That's why it's hard for them to accept or move forward and then know what the next step is. It's a really, really hard road. So I'm very glad, Buena, that you invited me, and I'm happy to share my story here today. Thank you all very much.